Hi everyone. So it's 7:01, so we'll slowly get started as we're just over half of the amount of people that signed up, but I know it's a nice night in various parts of the province for a ride, so we'll see how many show up. Um, just to introduce myself to everybody, I am Chris Baskey's the Club Relations and Membership Manager at Ontario Cycling. I have been here for the better part of 15 or 16 years in various capacities, having taken over clubs around 2012 or so. I want to just go over what we're going to do tonight. So tonight's presentation is all about the insurance program and the insurance coverage benefits that come with your Ontario Cycling membership and as being an OC member. So before I do get started, I do just want to acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from Ottawa, which is located on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. I recognize the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. I honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory, and Ontario Cycling does extend its deepest respect to all First Nations people, both past and present, as the custodians of the beautiful land that we reside on. So joining us tonight is our guest presenter, Brent Brandon, who is the Senior VP of Sport and Entertainment with Gallagher Insurance. Brent will be discussing the core insurance program that comes with your OC membership, including the liability and sport accident coverage benefits, as well as some of the items that are kind of personal option items as well that you can opt into that are exclusive to OC members. For those that did submit questions in advance, I want to thank you for those. I have forwarded all those to Brent, and we have tried to incorporate as many of those answers within the presentation as possible. If you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to just type it in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I will be taking a look at that throughout the presentation, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. But if there's a question that I feel is relevant, I may try and just kind of squeak it in while Brent is talking about that relevant topic. If we can't get to all the questions or we can't get to everything tonight, feel free to certainly send a question to us. We always want questions, feedback, any comments to our general email, which is support@ontariocycling.org. So whether you think of something after the presentation or you want to just give us feedback, we're more than happy to hear, and we're more than happy to get you an answer if we didn't answer a question that you had tonight. So I'm going to pass it off to Brent. I do want to also mention that this is being recorded, so we can use this for further kind of improvement of our services, our presentations. But also, if anybody ever has a question, feel free to reach out to our office, and we can probably provide a link to this as well. So off to you, Brent.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everyone on the call for taking the time to be with us this evening. I'm going to try to go through it as quickly as we can, because I'm sure there's a few that have a program they want to watch at 7:30. But by all means, feel free to type questions into the Q&A whenever they arise. So without further ado, we're going to dive right into the core programming. So this is the coverage that the cycling clubs get when they join Ontario Cycling. And there's two key aspects to the core insurance program that are automatically included with your membership. The first is general liability coverage, and the other is sport accident, sometimes also known as AD&D, which is short for accidental death and dismemberment. You can see why they go with sport accident instead of that. So what are they is the key question here. So general liability is the coverage that is going to protect your club from legal action taken against you arising out of bodily injury or third-party property damage. That doesn't mean damage to your own property, that means damage to somebody else's. So this is the biggest exposure facing Ontario Cycling and the cycling clubs. An unfortunate reality of participation in the sport is that people sometimes get hurt. Sometimes when people get hurt, they choose to sue. And when they do, they tend to sue everybody they can think of. So the club, Ontario Cycling, Cycling Canada, the venue if it's an indoor ride, the municipality sometimes if it's an outdoor ride or race, and even occasionally fellow riders and fellow cyclists. So the Ontario Cycling Insurance Program protects everybody that I just mentioned. So it protects the members, it protects the club, it protects Ontario Cycling, it protects Cycling Canada. The limit of that is a $10 million limit of liability, and that is per claim with no general aggregate. We've seen a lot of other products and programs out there that have an aggregate limit, and what an aggregate limit means is that that's the total amount of money the policy is going to pay out in any one year, which would effectively mean that every club is sharing a limit, but that's luckily not the case here. There's also a $10 million professional liability limit. This is a professional liability is sometimes also referred to as errors and omissions. This is largely, I mean, it applies to everybody, but it's going to be most relevant for the coaches in terms of their professional coaching duties as they coach members during sanctioned activity. The other kind of sublimit under the general liability to be aware of is abuse liability, which has a $2 million sublimit. I don't know how many of you have put on just about any news program in the last month or so, but abuse is a pretty prevalent topic in sports, and $2 million as a sublimit is more than most organizations have. These days, you're kind of lucky if you can get one. So getting two for cycling was certainly good. The sport accident cover at first glance appears to be very similar to the general liability in the sense that it also responds to injuries to cyclists and participants. Where it differs, though, is for the general liability policy to be triggered or activated, there needs to be an allegation of fault, which is usually done in the form of a lawsuit or legal action. The sport accident policy doesn't care whose fault it was. All it cares is that there was an accident. So as soon as someone's injured, that sport accident policy is there and available. What it reimburses you for is medical expenses associated with that injury. Now, we're all lucky enough to live in Ontario, where we've got an excellent healthcare program. So the sport accident policy is going to be access to OHIP and any coverage you have available during a work plan. So a lot of those expenses are going to get taken care of by OHIP and or any work plan available to you, but there's certain things that aren't always covered. So for example, like Gallagher's dental plan covers 80%. If I was injured in a Ontario cycling race, I would be able to claim that other 20% under the sport accident program. We also see a lot of physio, rehab, repatriation, that sort of thing under the sport accident policy. The death benefit under sport accident policy is $50K. Obviously, that's not particularly high, but any sort of catastrophic injury, like a permanent injury or a death, you're going to see a lawsuit out of, and that's going to become a liability claim. The sport accident policy works best with kind of minor to medium injuries, and a well-functioning sport accident policy often prevents those minor to medium injuries from becoming lawsuits, because if you don't have any out-of-pocket medical expenses, you're less likely to sue. I'm not seeing anything lighting up in the Q&A, so you guys are going easy on me so far. We will move on to kind of other available coverages to members. Actually, we're going to go on to important considerations to the core programming. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the first very important consideration for the clubs is the recognition that this coverage applies during sanctioned activity. So any Ontario cycling sanctioned and approved activity, that's going to include races and formal competitions, as well as regularly scheduled and kind of filed with Ontario cycling club rides. So that's where the scope of coverage extends. It's not kind of any time any of your members are on the bike, it's during sanctioned activity only. We will come back to that in a bit filed under obvious foreshadowing. We also want to stress the importance of safe sport protocols, again, going back to the abuse liability that I talked about earlier. Abuse is very prevalent in sport. There's obligations on NSOs and PSOs to have proper safe sport protocols in place. And it's incredibly important that the member clubs follow these safe sport protocols, not only from just a risk management perspective in terms of we all want to keep our athletes safe from potential abuse issues, but also in terms of the insurance coverage. Ontario Cycling has made warranties to the insurance company that the clubs follow these safe sport protocols. And if you're not you jeopardize coverage because you enter what's called a misrepresentation situation. Every insurance policy out there has a misrepresentation clause that, basically says if you have lied to the insurance company, the policy is null and void. And so if we've told the insurance company that we have these safe sport protocols and everyone's following them, and you aren't, that possibly creates a misrepresentation situation. We obviously want to avoid that. So it's very important that the clubs are buying into these safe sport protocols, which you should want to anyway. Again, the key here is we want to keep our athletes safe, and we want to keep our athletes healthy and on the bike. We do have the ability to accommodate the use of e-bikes in sanctioned activity. The caveats around that is that they have to be pedal assisted. They can't be just completely motorized, because then they become, a vehicle, not sports equipment. And a max speed of 32 kilometers an hour, which is consistent with Ontario law. So they have to be legal. Finally, wanted to highlight the liquor liability exclusion. Again, this is very common on sport policies to exclude anything associated with liquor. Now, acknowledging sometimes there are going to be social events where liquor is served, we do have the ability to add liquor liability back in for specific events. There is an additional premium charge to do so, and we need to know about it in advance, and we need the details. So if you're having an event where there is going to be some sort of social aspect to it afterwards, like a beer garden or anything where there's going to be alcohol served, you're going to want host liquor cover for that event. You're going to want to reach out to Ontario Cycling and make those arrangements, which again, we can do. Chris, I do see one in the Q&A before I move on to the next slide. Might as well tackle that.
Yeah, so the question was about if the repatriation, and then does this coverage apply to events outside of Ontario?
So, a very good question. It does, but not always in the way that people think. So the coverage will respond to events that occur outside of province and outside of country, but it's only going to reimburse expenses incurred in Canada. And so any expenses, so if you're leaving the country, we would strongly recommend also getting travel medical cover, because that's what's going to cover you for medical expenses incurred out of country, like in the US or Europe or wherever you're going. So once you're back home, any expenses like if you get injured in Utah and have a hospital stay in Utah, this policy is not going to cover the expenses of that hospital stay in Utah. But once you get back home, medical expenses that you incur here will be covered by the sport accident policy. I hope that is enough clarification to answer that question. How many cases were claimed and paid out for cyclist injuries in 2022, and what would be an average paid amount? I don't have that exact numbers here. In Ontario, there were about, I want to say probably 10 to 15 sport accident claims. Chris, does that sound right? You've seen them before I get them.
Probably, I'd have to go back and look.
And we can determine the total payouts. 2022 was a good year as far as liability was concerned. There weren't any liability claims. It was just on the sport accident. Although again, it's important to note with liability claims, the lawsuit typically gets filed 2 years after the fact. So we'll really find out about 2022's liability history in 2024. But nothing yet on the liability front, and a moderate number of sport accidents, but it was a pretty good claims year. In terms of John's motor pacing activities, I'm going to need a little bit more color on what that means. Is that like the vehicle? Is that what you're asking about, John?
So while we wait, just for clarification, so if you do check the chat at the bottom of your screen, I've just put in a few links at the front or in the chat. One is about kind of the difference between a sanctioned event and an unsanctioned event, or a sanctioned club activity and a non-sanctioned club activity, as well as a link to where you can find more insurance program information on our website, including a policy summary, the sort of the basics of the program as well as if you're looking for any sort of out of country options, there's some information as well there. So yeah.
So John has typed in here, typically a scooter is used to pace riders in training. If there's a motor vehicle being used in any of these events, we would look to the policy covering the motor vehicle to cover liability issues around the use of that motor vehicle. So whoever owns the scooter should have a policy in place for that scooter. To answer Mark's question around a historical example of a lawsuit that was covered by insurance, the last kind of big one was on a race where a spectator tried to, I think the spectator's mostly at fault in this one, but it still did become a pretty big lawsuit, where a spectator hopped a barrier and tried to cross the course and got run over by a participant in the event. And unfortunately, that spectator ended up being quadriplegic as a result of the accident. And they sued the race organizer, the club, the individual, the province, all of that. That was in 2018, but that's the last kind of big one that we saw on the liability side. All right, just to move on, I think now we are at a part where we get to the extended coverage options. So everything that I just talked about is what is automatically included within the coverage with your membership, but we do have coverage options available for those clubs that need it. The first and foremost is directors and officers coverage. So this is what protects the club board arising out of the management of the club. So there is sometimes some misconception on, oh, we need directors and officers to protect our board if someone gets hurt and sues. If someone gets hurt and sues, it's going to be the general liability policy. The most common types of D&O claims that we see, and we do see a lot of these in other sports from club boards, are things like wrongful dismissal, constructive dismissal, other types of employment practices related claims. Failure to disclose a conflict of interest is a big one. Conflict of interests happen all the time on boards. They need to be handled appropriately, and they aren't always. And then my personal favorite is the failure to follow your own bylaws. My risk management advice on that one is you write the bylaws, so they shouldn't be that hard to follow. Make sure you're following your own bylaws. And if there are any of your bylaws that you're having trouble following, you can change them. So it seems like an easy one to avoid, but we see them all the time. So we have a program with very, very good rates for club boards who can buy into and get directors and officers coverage for their boards. I had mentioned before that the core coverage applies only to sanctioned activities, but a lot of cyclists have training activities outside of those sanctioned club rides and outside of those sanctioned activities. And so we do have an option for them. From a sport accident perspective, we can extend the coverage in two facets. The first is for individual training rides. And this is sort of any ride where the purpose of the ride is to get in training or exercise, really kind of no set destination in mind. The defining line between the two is use of the bike as sports equipment versus use of the bike as a potential vehicle. Because the big one on individual training is that we're not looking to cover people commuting to work on that, because that's more using the bike as a vehicle versus as a sports equipment. And, I know you can make the argument that commuting is training, but the insurance company has never really bought that. That's why we created the second additional buy-up, and that additional one is, and that's the anytime on the bike. So that would cover you when you're commuting to work. That'd cover you if you're riding your bike to the grocery store. and it would also cover sort of any individual training activities that you might have. So there's two kind of options to expand the sport accident cover beyond that. The reason we only expand the sport accident cover is because when you're on an individual bike ride, your homeowner's liability would cover you from a liability perspective. Confirm that with your homeowner's broker, but 99% of homeowners policies would have that the liability would cover you when you're on an individual bike ride. But we can expand the sport accident to those times. I already touched on travel medical. If you're leaving the country, we strongly recommend that you get travel medical cover because travel medical covers not just injuries that happen while you're participating in cycling. Travel medical will cover you if you get sick, if you get hit by a bus. You're not going to be on the bike the entire time you're away, but the travel medical covers you the entire time you're away. Property and crime coverage is one that a lot of clubs have if you have physical assets. I mentioned earlier that the third-party property damage covers if you damage other people's property, but if you have your own and you want coverage for things like fire, theft, vandalism, damage, we can provide property and or crime cover. And then finally, cyber. I will admit I'm unaware of any cycling club that actually buys cyber insurance, but we're not doing our jobs if we don't make you aware that it's available, because people get hacked. It happens all the time. The prevailing wisdom is it's not a matter of if you're going to get hacked, it's a matter of when. So cyber is a good idea, but it's not cheap. And so I understand why not-for-profit clubs without a lot of money to spend on insurance choose to forego. Again, just before I move on, might as well tackle the questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on the travel medical and basically kind of any of the coverage, but especially with the travel medical, sometimes you also want to look at, there's a program on our website. I know Gallagher also has an option. The one thing you want to make sure for anybody who is into racing that is on this is sometimes there's a difference between you just going to ride your bike and you participating in a competitive activity if you go to the US or whatnot. So you want to make sure that you clarify exactly what your intent is when you're looking to get these things, because it may, the level of coverage or what you may have to pay might be dependent on that.
In the Q&A, I see one from Lily here, a question on D&O, and if the board is and would you still have a D&O exposure if the board is volunteers? And the answer to that is absolutely. For example, I'm on the board of Skate Ontario. That's a volunteer board. And the first thing I did was say, let me see the D&O coverage, please. Absolutely, volunteers still have a duty of care and can still be sued and made liable for wrongful acts. Going on down to, does the insurance company require cycling clubs to require members to sign a waiver? The assumption is that waivers are being signed. Chris, does Ontario Cycling have a waiver that they can provide?
Yeah, so everybody who joins Ontario Cycling would have to sign the waiver that we've got that is age appropriate, whether you're an adult or a youth, as well as our concussion form. And any club that's hosting like a tryout opportunity, so something where they can register a ride or have somebody come out to a ride who's a non-member to test it out. Same thing, each individual who's basically going to be at a club on a bike or at an event on a bike has to have a waiver signed to be able to participate.
The professional liability is part of the general liability, John. It's a separate limit on it, but it's built into the general liability coverage. To the anonymous attendee, does the individual training cover things like unsanctioned group rides? If everybody in the unsanctioned group ride had purchased it, then yes, the sport accident would extend to each individual as they've purchased it. But if you're planning on going out with a group and everyone's a member of the club, our strong recommendation is just get the ride sanctioned, because then that's going to provide the liability coverage for the club itself. On to Alicia's question, the 27 was quoted for the individual buy-up. That is the individual training level. The anytime on the bike is significantly higher than that. Chris, I forget the exact
I
number.
believe it's 114, give or take, but I believe it's
sounds,
around 114 plus tax or so.
And
Or plus
obviously,
CCNP, sorry.
you would only need, like, if you're getting the anytime on the bike, you don't need to get the individual training first. That would be all encompassing. So Neil's connected with Chris on this. So you've been asked by Hamilton Conservation Authority to be named harmless in a policy. Typically that means additional insured and having 2 million coverage. Well, the good news is you'd have 10, so that's a lot more than 2. So you're definitely meeting their requirements. And no, there's no additional policy or cost for that. If you're a member club and the activity is sanctioned, we can issue a COI. We turn those around in 24. I hope it's in 24 hours. That's what I commit to, but it's not actually me who does them. So I hope our team does them in 24 hours. Chris, start telling me if they don't.
No worries. Yeah, Neil, we'll connect. We'll connect tomorrow just to go through the form and everything.
Brenda has a question around the liquor liability, but I'm assume there was more to that question coming in.
Yeah, Brenda, if you want to just clarify if it's for, an event or a club activity or sort of what you're looking at there.
So sorry, we got one more question before I get into our claims matching game, which is less of a game and more just me telling you how it works. I opted for all the coverage. Process question: what are my responsibilities if I get into an accident while on an unsanctioned solo training ride? I will get to that on the next slide after claims matching game, but I can also answer it right now. That is, you need to send in an incident report to Ontario Cycling within 30 days of the accident so that we can open a potential claim file. And then you would have coverage for the expenses as per the sport accident schedule for 52 weeks from the date of the injury. So 1 year from the injury. But we need to know about the incident within 30 days of it happening. So here's Brenda's question. If a rider consumes alcohol post-sanctioned ride and has a driving accident on their way home, is there any responsibility assigned to the club? That is for the courts to determine, but it is very possible that the club would get named in a lawsuit arising out of that. We have seen that in other sports, even when it wasn't an official social event, just somebody tailgating in a parking lot. We have seen the league and the club and the sport get named in that lawsuit when they when they got into a motor vehicle accident. So whether or not you'd be found liable is up to the courts, but it's very possible you'd get named in a suit, and that's one of the benefits of insurance is that it defends the lawsuit whether you're liable or not. Finally, our club will make a team for a big charity ride. Would that be an OC sanctioned event? Chris, that sounds like one for you, not me.
Yeah, so basically when we talk about an OC sanctioned event or sanctioned club activity, we're talking about something that you're hosting for essentially mostly members. There are sanctioned events through our events department that may be a grand fond or whatnot, a charity ride, those types of things. So any of our members participating in that would have coverage. So if you're a club with a group, let's say that's going into a charity ride that isn't sanctioned by Ontario Cycling, the activity itself wouldn't be considered sanctioned because you're going into an activity with a number of non-members. But let's say you were to host sort of your own charity fundraiser where it's all members of your club, that could easily be a sanctioned activity if you just contact us and say, hey, this is the activity that we're planning to run. It's all members. So again, your best bet might be to reach out to our office, just find out or look at the calendar on our event page. to find out if the event is sanctioned. If it is sanctioned, then any member that's in it is covered. If it's not sanctioned, then no, we wouldn't count this as a sanctioned activity. It would just be essentially people going into the activity themselves, and they may happen to be wearing the club kit and whatnot. So hopefully that answers the question.
So going on to the our claims matching game here. I already covered a lot of this earlier in the presentation when I was talking about what the coverages are, but just as a very quick recap, the general liability is there to respond to lawsuits arising out of bodily injury or third-party property damage, like you crash into somebody else's car and damage the car. The sport accident is there as a medical benefits policy for responding to physical injuries. And then the directors and officers is there for wrongful acts arising out of your duties as a director. So that's going to include things like employment practices claims, conflict of interest, or bylaw violations are by far the most. I mean, 90% of D&O claims are employment practices related. If there's any further questions on that, happy to answer them, but I think that's pretty straightforward. Going into the claims process, so Ontario Cycling has claims forms on the website, I believe. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so on our website, and we'll update our insurance page to add it there as well. On our website, there is a link in our resources section to what we call our sport injury report form. So that would be essentially what you would use if you were injured in a club activity, injured in a OC sanctioned event, injured in a if you are doing your personal riding or personal training and you have that coverage, you can still submit this sport injury report form. There's an option to check off personal training, and all those get sent to us, and then we report that to Gallagher, and then I'll let you jump on the actual sort of claim part after.
Yeah, so we need to know about the incident within 30 days to kind of open an incident file. I'm jumping around here. This is kind of the incident versus the open claim. Because you're not always going to have incurred expenses within 30 days, but we need to know about the incident so that we can be ready for it, for lack of a better term. It does need to be submitted to Ontario Cycling, and that is because we need Ontario Cycling to confirm that it was a sanctioned event or that you've signed up for the individual athlete cover, because that's not reported to us instantaneously. And then, yeah, once we've got the open incident, again, coverage is there for 52 weeks from the date of the injury. So once it's an open claim and you start incurring expenses, send in receipts, send in the evidence of those expenses, and you will be reimbursed for those from the insurance policy. There's no deductible on the sport accident. It's pretty simple. Initially, if anyone on this call had a claim in 2021, they may have been annoyed at how long it took to get reimbursed. I'm happy to report that we have ironed out a lot of those wrinkles. That stemmed a lot from the insurance company in this case, which was one of the questions that Chris had emailed in. The insurance company here is AXA XL in London, as in England. And so there was some bottlenecks in terms of getting the money from London to Canada to the claimant. But we've done once we kind of became aware of that problem, we have worked to streamline that process and get your money a lot faster. Because that's a stupid way to annoy people, is to botch the claims process. So happy that we fixed that.
I do. So just want to confirm. So it's 30 days to report the incident or the injury, and then how many days do they have to open the claim from the date of the incident?
90, I believe.
Okay. And this is personal experience. What I would stress is if you are injured or to at least be ready with the accident claim forms, as opposed to wait to see if you need any coverage. Let's say sometimes what happens is people will say, okay, I was injured, I'll go through the process with my my work plan or my spousal plan, and that can sometimes be time consuming in itself.
There's no harm in opening a claim file and then not submitting anything under it.
Yeah.
That's so yeah, seconded. Recommend if you're injured and you think you might have some expenses, send in the injury report form and send in a claim form, and then we'll be ready to go. The sport accident is designed to be used.
There's a number of questions in the chat, so I'll just try and jump on a couple, and then I'll let Brent do some of the other ones. So Melinda had a question about, and it's actually kind of similar to somebody else's question about OC members participating with other clubs or in activities that are sanctioned with Ontario Cycling, but with another club. So your Ontario Cycling membership, you only need one. You only need one membership. The type of membership you need may depend on kind of what you're doing. So obviously, if you're racing, you might need a race license. If you're joining a private team, you probably need a race license. But if you're just thinking, hey, I want to join 2 or 3 clubs, or Club A is actually inviting Club B or members of other clubs to participate, as long as they are Ontario Cycling members, that is okay. So essentially your one membership allows you to join any club, subject to if they have any specific policies, as well as, if you're invited to a club ride or whatnot, you're fine there. So it's not like you need a membership for each club that you join. You may have to pay a club registration fee. That's up to the club. But what we certainly have wanted to stress to clubs, and what a lot of clubs have stressed to us over the years, is that sort of, I'll call it cross-border, cross-club promotional activity stuff. That is strongly encouraged. So if you are, there's a question here about if everybody participating in a charity event are OC members, but of different clubs, does the coverage stay in force? So if, let's say, the event or the ride, the charity event is sanctioned with us as a club activity, so it's a club hosting it, doing a fundraiser, or it's sanctioned as an event as a fundraiser, and everybody's a member, all the members in it would have coverage. So I just want to sort of clarify that, because it does sometimes come across as, okay, I can only use my membership at one club. No, your OC membership is good across the board. It's just a matter of, some clubs are going to say, hey, come out and you don't have to, make a commitment to us. Others are going to say, no, you've got to join our club. We have our own fee. So that's really on the club side, not so much on the OC side.
Next one up, Chris, that I'm seeing is, in the event of a successful claim, would the ride leader be responsible for the deductible on a GL?
You're talking about the deductible with the ride leader. A good question. I'd have to look into it a little bit more, I think. Whoever posed the question, if you want to reach out to the office tomorrow with the exact same question, I'll make a note of it, but it came in as anonymous, so I don't know who I'm responding to. But yeah, if you want to make sure that you send in that question, we'll definitely look into it and get an answer for you.
I see Frank's, is there a deductible on the general liability? Yes, there is. I embarrassingly don't know what it is. I think it's $1,000, or it's either 1,000 or 2,500. We can confirm that as well. I apologize, Frank, for not having that in front of me. But again, we can confirm and share a summary. Chris, I think this next one's for you. What do clubs need to know their ride is sanctioned?
Yeah, so basically every club essentially sends in a calendar or schedule to us of activities that we're aware of, so that we can sanction it. So most clubs will have a policy in place that says, okay, if it's not on their club website or on an app they're using as an example, it's not considered sanctioned. So the big thing with a lot of clubs is, if they have a club forum and people are arranging kind of ad hoc rides as members, that may or may not, that may not be sanctioned by the club. So you really want to, if you're part of a club, ensure that you are communicating with the club if you want to put on a ride, that, hey, I want to put on a ride, you know, we need a ride leader, or, you know, I am a ride leader, I want to do this. But essentially the sanctioning comes from the club submitting something to us and us giving them the A-OK on that. So
The next one is the anytime on the bike policy. Report directly to Gallagher or OCA. Still needs to be reported to Ontario Cycling, because they're the ones who keep the records on who's bought the anytime on the bike policy. So we do still need that to come through Ontario Cycling. Although I misread that question the first time around about policy for the actual bicycles, and I really hope we have something for physical damage to the bicycles soon. Chris has been all over me on that, being very diligent, and I appreciate that. It's something that we've been working on for a couple of years now, trying to get an expanded coverage offering available for members' bikes. And I'm optimistic that we're going to have something soon. I don't want to commit to timelines, but I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to offer that shortly. Do documents for a claim have to be original, or can they be digital? That's a really good question, Ewan. I will find that out and get back to you on that. I don't know. I think they can be digital, but they should be able to be digital. But I'll confirm that. I'm just making a note here. Can this claim only be processed after a work claim? So yeah, the sport accident is secondary to provincial healthcare and kind of any other coverage available. So you would use your work benefits first. So sorry, Alicia, I'm just seeing the second half of your question now. Yeah, so for example, can claim physical therapy with work and other expense via the cycling insurance. So that would go back to the example I used of dental. If dental doesn't cover 100% of the expense, like you go for a dental visit and you know, it only covers 80%, you could submit the 80% to your work plan, and you could submit the 20% to Ontario Cycling to get 100% of that dental visits covered. Obviously, there are limits eventually, like your total's going to run out at some point, but but yeah, that's how that can work. Bike coverage would be great. We agree. We hope we can come up with something that everyone's really happy with, but that is still a work in progress.
I think that might be it for questions.
I think that's all the questions.
At least for now, yeah.
If there are any others, I also think that's the end of my slideshows. Yeah, there we go. You'll notice I did update the title, Chris. Sorry,
you put recreation, and you told me it was education.
Oh, it is sports.
It was entertainment.
I forgot to update that part. It is entertainment, not recreation. Do the cyclists need to actually pay their expenses first and then be reimbursed by Gallagher? Yeah, it is a reimbursement policy. I mean, if you can get an invoice, again, if you can get an invoice without paying it, I mean, most providers are not going to do that. But if you can get an invoice without paying it, yeah, you can just submit the invoice to us. But typically, it works as a reimbursement because, you know, the insurance company is not going to know if you paid it or not. But typically, it's a reimbursement policy.
I'm just putting my email in the chat. Just I think everybody got something with my email. Yeah, so again, if anybody has any questions, like Brent said, you know, whether it's about membership, whether it's insurance related, don't hesitate to give us a shout. We have office staff at the office 9 to 4, oftentimes earlier and later. So, you know, if you have a question, we'll figure out who the best person to answer it is, whether it is an OC staff person or if it's insurance related. We definitely send it over to Brent and his team and get you an answer. If you have, you know, I'm gonna say potential question that is more on the legal-ish side than it is insurance, we can also get a recommendation or some feedback on that as well. So
I see Mark's comment here about concerns about if the ride leaders are liable for the deductible costs. They're certainly not going to be kind of like legally liable for deductible costs. It's just a matter of how different sports handle how deductibles get paid. I can say from the insurance company standpoint, they only care that the deductible does get paid. I don't know, I've seen, we work with a number of different sports at Gallagher, so I've seen a number of examples of sports making their member clubs pay the deductible. I don't think I've ever seen a PSO require an individual to pay it, but that's whatever the Ontario Cycling kind of member policy is. So which Chris is going to double check, but a club could always, even if the Ontario Cycling, and Chris, I don't mean to undermine you in any way here, but even if the Ontario Cycling is like, yeah, ride leader's got to do it, a club could definitely step in and save their ride leader.
it is a question I have made a note to ask.
But that wasn't meant to strike fear.
I'm on mute. Okay, yeah, so if there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Or like I said, you can always email them after the fact. But we've pretty much hit almost everything we want. There is, like I said, I put a few links earlier in the presentation. If you ever want to know a little bit more about the insurance policy, there is a summary document on the website. If you just scroll to our website and go to the membership section, scroll down to almost the very bottom, there's an entire insurance section there for members, for clubs, as well as a link to the Gallagher website, and information on the travel medical stuff through CAPE. So right now, you can definitely take a look at that if you're planning to do an activity outside of the country. But yeah, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to quickly pose them. Otherwise, I'm going to let you guys have your evening, because I'm sure it's a great evening in various parts of the province, and you probably don't want to listen to Brent and I too long.
Go Leafs, go. I appreciate everyone taking the time.
Yes, thank you for coming out. And again, if you have any feedback on the presentation, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. And we have a team that's dedicated to basically servicing our members, our organizers. Definitely there's somebody who can help you out if I happen to not be available. But generally speaking, most of the membership or club inquiries tend to go through me. So. Thanks, Melinda, for coming out. Thanks, Carol. Thank you, Frank. Thanks, Adam. I got your email, by the way. I think I sent a response, but if you don't see it, let me know.